print 24 brochures is 8 minutes. It takes a printer 8 minutes to print a brochure. So as long as there are as many printers as there are brochures and they are working simultaneously, the time it takes to print the brochures is the same. The answer to the third problem is 29 days. If the weed patch doubles every day, then by working backwards from when the field was completely covered, we may infer that it was half covered the day before. Now, if you got any of these wrong, that does not mean that your whole brain, the whole set of your its is wrong. Okay? I don't know how many times I have to, but I'm happy to keep reassuring you of that. In fact, I have read these questions in different versions in my reading. And almost every time I see the bat and the ball problem, I go, okay, clearly 100 and 110. That mechanism to take the numbers 100 and 110 and sort of do that incorrect calculation of saying that one is 100 and the other is 110, the other is 10, that mechanism exists in every one of us. It is not a bad thing to have that mechanism. It's a quick, cool judgment. It's a good PM. It's a fine PM. Look, you see 100 and 110, you hear the words total, you hear one's blah, blah, 100 more, and okay, it's a fine PM, okay? We all have that mechanism in us. The question is not whether you have that mechanism in you. The question is just, when it's important, do you give yourself the time for other mechanisms to also be able to vote? And I didn't give you that time here. I just wanted you to shoot out the first answer. Not that you actually usually take that time when you don't feel tested. Anyway, continuing on page 9. Oh gosh, we're talking a lot. That was really important, I thought. All right. The economist Shane Frederick gave these questions with different examples to thousands of university students. 5 out of 6 got at least one of them wrong. 1 in 3 got them all wrong. Yet each question has a simple answer that almost everyone understands when it's pointed out. The problem is that people's heads are turned by superficial features of the problem, which they mistakenly think are relevant to the answer. We're going to just translate that into real something. What he's saying there, what I would paraphrase that as, is that there are aspects of the problem. They're going to slap certain mechanisms, and those things are just sirens. Those things that slap those mechanisms, so there are things that are going to trigger those mechanisms to respond to those questions. Sometimes not adaptive mechanisms. They'll give an output. That output will be wrong. It's not that the person necessarily had a whole system that mistakenly believed it was relevant to the answer, but it is as though the machine thought it was relevant, that the superficial features were relevant to the problem, since it was the superficial features that led to their output. But there doesn't have to actually exist in the system the belief that these are the correct features to be judging. I hope that makes sense. So the problem is that people's heads are turned by superficial features of the problem, which they mistakenly think are relevant to the answer. We're going to Occam's razor that mistakenly think are relevant to the answer. We're going to replace it with as though these things are relevant to the answer. We're going to change it from people's heads were turned, because we're not just one head. Well, we are technically speaking, but in that head are lots of its. And so we're just going to say that some of those its that shouldn't have been activated by this problem, that don't actually lead to a useful answer, they were activated by features of the problem, and they gave us they produced an answer. Okay. Such as the rounded numbers 110 in the first problem, and the fact that the number of printers is the same as the number of minutes in the second. Okay, so these features slap some mechanisms. Those mechanisms produce an answer, and actually those mechanisms had no role to play in this thing, but they thought their name was called because they saw round numbers, or they saw that the number of printers was the same as the number of minutes. So they're like, oh, 8 printers, 8 minutes, 8 brochures, 24 printers, 24 brochures, 24 minutes, bro. But actually, they should have kept their mouth shut. But that's okay. When I say should have, I don't mean... But anyway, Frederick calls his low-tech battery the cognitive reflection test and suggested it exposes a cleavage between two cognitive systems, later made famous by Kahneman, his sometimes co-author, in the 2011 bestseller Thinking Fast and Slow, which we know is the most important book in psychology. System 1 operates rapidly and effortlessly, and it seduces us with the wrong answers. System 2 requires concentration, motivation, and the application of learned rules, and it allows us to grasp the right ones. Please do not think that System 2 is sort of the conscious you, and System 1 is just your instinct. These are both automatic systems. And remember, you don't exist. There's no such thing as the conscious mind. There's just a spectrum of automatic mechanisms of varying complexity and value. No one thinks there are literally two anatomical systems in the brain. There are two modes of operation which cut across many brain structures. System 1 means snap judgments. System 2 means thinking twice. The lesson of the cognitive reflection test is that blunders of reasoning may come from thoughtlessness rather than ineptitude. Even students at the math-proud Massachusetts Institute of Technology averaged only 2 out of 3 correct. Performance does correlate with math skill, as you'd expect, but it also correlates with patience. People who describe themselves as not impulsive and who would rather wait for a larger payment in a month than get a smaller one right away are less likely to fall into the traps. So what that means is those initial mechanisms, they run, but because of that patience and not just immediately those answers being delivered because of the way that the brain's wired, other mechanisms get to intervene, get to engage with those. And then those people who are patient, less impulsive, not me, are less likely to fall in the traps. I fall in the trap every time. I'm like, 24 minutes for sure. Well, maybe not the for sure part. The first two items feel like trick questions. That is because they give details which, in the back and forth of conversation, would be relevant to what the speaker is asking, but in these examples are designed to lead the hearer astray. Parenthetical note, people do better when the smartphone costs, say, $73 more than the case, and the combination costs $89. But of course, real life is also baited with garden paths and siren songs that lure us from good decisions. And remember, in our vocabulary, we've borrowed this word siren for anything that sings in the brain, so that like sounds right in the brain or that feels right, but isn't actually necessarily right. So But of course, real life is also baited with garden paths and siren songs that lure us from good decisions, and resisting them is a part of being rational. People who fall for the alluring but wrong answers on the cognitive reflection test appear to be less rational in other ways, such as turning down lucrative offers that require a bit of waiting or a bit of risk. And the third problem, the one with the weed patch, is not a trick question, but taps a real cognitive infirmity. Human intuition doesn't grasp exponential, geometric growth, namely something that rises at a rising rate, proportional to how large it already is, such as compound interest, economic growth, and the spread of a contagious disease. People mistake it for steady creep or slight acceleration, and their imaginations don't keep up with their relentless doubling. If you deposit $400 a month into a retirement account that earns 10% annually, how big will your nest egg be after 40 years? Many people guess around $200,000, which is what you